All right, finally tonight, Miss Amy Wood is going to speak to us tonight about the Test to Stay program that DHEC has approved for us. And so I'm going to turn it over to Nurse Wood.
So in light of the fact that DHEC did do some clarifying over the weekend to the school guidance, most of the changes was to childcare and what they are able to do every time. Thank you. So I decided to add a little bit of just the overall isolation and quarantine information to kind of address those clarifications that they made. So isolation is still full isolation, 10 days from symptom onset or date the test collected if they are asymptomatic. Isolation may end after 5 days if there are no symptoms on day 5, no fever for at least 24 hours without the use of fever-reducing medicine, and they wear a mask through day 10. One of the clarifying things that DHEC did this weekend was to point out that students who are participating in activities where there is forced exhalation, so think sports, band, things like that, they may not return to those activities, although they may return to school with a mask after 5 days. They may not return to those activities until after 10 days. And so this is a graphic that DHEC has done, which kind of shows how soon isolation can end for people who have symptoms and test positive and people without symptoms who test positive. The definition of a school close contact for students who are positive, those who are within 3 feet for greater than 15 minutes cumulative over a 24-hour period, regardless of mask use. For student positives, anyone 3 to 6 feet for greater than 15 minutes cumulative over a 24-hour period who is not masked. So that is still pretty much the same as it's been for quite some time. Staff has always been anyone less than 6 feet for greater than 15 minutes. And so they did clarify that also when you are doing athletics or activities where you have that forced exhalation, that is also within 6 feet for greater than 15 minutes over that 24-hour period, regardless of mask use. So close contacts who are exempt from quarantine, this is still the same. Students 5 to 17 years old who are fully vaccinated, and that definition is both doses of the primary vaccination series plus 14 days. And then students 18 years of age or older who are maximally vaccinated. So students who've completed their primary vaccination series and received the booster if they are eligible. Students who have tested positive for COVID-19, either through antigen or PCR testing within 90 days of their exposure. All of those students, when they're identified as a close contact, they do not have to quarantine, but they do have to wear a mask for 10 days after that last exposure. Close contacts who are not exempt from quarantine. So this is just a review of what we've been doing. Full quarantine is 10 days from the last date of contact. You're able to return to school after 5 days in quarantine if there are no symptoms during daily monitoring, and you wear a mask through day 10. One of the clarifying things that DHEC did this weekend was to point out that students, if they are not enrolled in a test to stay program, they may return to the school environment after 5 days of quarantine and wear a mask. But if they want to return to those activities where there is forced exhalation, they would need to have a test no earlier than day 5 in order to do that. Having said all that, I am very happy to say that we have researched and planned and are ready to move forward later this week with the Test to Stay program in the district. And so if someone is eligible, if they have been identified as a close contact and they are not exempt from quarantine, this allows them to remain in school during that quarantine period. If they are eligible, they may attend school if they have no symptoms during daily monitoring. They have a negative viral test, either antigen or PCR, between days 5 and 7 after their last exposure, and they wear a mask through day 10. So household contacts is a subcategory of close contacts, and I know that a lot of our families have had questions about what exactly is a household contact. So they are a subcategory of close contacts. So when we say close contacts have to do this or close contacts need to do that, household contacts are involved in that close contact information. Their quarantine length, though, is dependent on the ability of the positive case or cases to separate away from the student during the isolation period. So students who are household contacts where the positive case or cases are unable to separate away are not eligible for test to stay. And so if you think about it, every day that that person who is unable to separate away is contagious or infectious during their isolation period is another last day of contact for those students in the home. So we have to wait until we get to that true last date of contact from that contagious person, and then we have to calculate the quarantine date. So students who are household contacts where the positive case or cases are unable to separate away must remain home through that positive case's isolation period plus the duration of quarantine, which would be either 10 days for the full quarantine or 5 days with no symptoms and a mask for day 6 through 10. So this is the COVID-19 little DHEC graphic that they've updated with test to stay. And so you see no quarantine is required for those who are exposed and vaccinated. They do have to wear a mask for the 10 days. No quarantine is required for those who are exposed but have had a positive COVID-19 test within the last 90 days. They do still have to wear a mask day 1 through 10. And now that we have tests to stay, those who are exposed and unvaccinated can participate in the test to stay program. They are able to remain in school. They must monitor for symptoms, wear a mask, and have a negative COVID test between days 5 and 7 after that last exposure. It is recommended to do a second test 24 hours later, but that is not required. You can see here for household contacts, if they're able to separate, it says they can do the test to stay program. We plan to honor that. Those who must quarantine, though, household contacts who are unable to separate. Those are really the only folks who are not eligible if they are asymptomatic, who are not eligible to participate in test to stay. So what to expect with the test to stay program? Once we launch this, it's going to be managed by our contact investigators, not our nurses. So those folks
Ms. McCown.
are going to...
Ms. McCown, thank you. Mrs. McCown, please. Ms. McCown.
Managed by our contact investigators. If you had a report or completed the Google report form in the last 5 months, you've been contacted by the contact investigators for the district. We've been using them for several months now, and so we will continue to use them so that they can manage this, so that our school nurses are free to take care of the students in the building in which they are employed. So families who have exposures outside of school will still continue to report those on the Google report form that we've been using. They will have the opportunity to opt into Test to Stay. No one is going to be automatically added to the Test to Stay program. Parents must opt in for that. Families of students identified as school close contacts, when a student is positive at school, those families have been receiving communications from the school via school messenger. They will continue to do that. They will have a link where they can opt in to Test to Stay if they choose in that letter. We will accept home test results for these tests between days 5 and 7. They must be accompanied by the completed DHEC attestation form. And DHEC actually has stated that if we don't have those results by the end of day 7, the student must then quarantine at home for days 8 through 10. Any questions?
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, I think the community's aware we communicated DHEC, I guess last board meeting, asking them a question about the quarantine process. Chairwoman Green received a letter back from Dr. Simmer, who's the director of DHEC and Doctorate of Medicine and Master of Public Health, and he CC'd his board chair, Mark Elam. So some of this speaks to what Nurse Wood was just sharing, but I'd like to share some of those comments for the minutes. Just the board saw this letter, but I just want to make sure the community knows what DHEC is telling Lexington One. First of all, dear Chair Green, thank you for sharing your feedback with us. The Department of Health and Environmental Control understands and appreciates that Lexington District 1's desire to keep children in person for learning. We share this desire wholeheartedly and recognize the importance of in-person interactions when it comes to educating our youth. However, we also want to ensure South Carolina's children receive the best education possible in the safest environment possible. And then he talks through essentially some of the new testing guidelines. He then shares to us as a board, based on the data submitted by Lexington One for the week of January 14th, 14.4% of students who were quarantined became positive while in quarantine. Implementing the quarantine requirements from the school exclusion list stopped approximately 916 additional students from continuing to transmit to staff, students, and the greater community. Additionally, we can calculate how many additional likely infections would have occurred if those 916 students weren't quarantined. Omicron is the most infectious version of COVID-19 we've encountered, and on average, one infected person can transmit it to 7 other people if they do not quarantine. This variable changes based on multiple factors, but using a value of 7, we can estimate that Lexington One quarantine efforts successfully prevented 6,412 people from being infected and potentially losing educational time. And then finally, they conclude, DHEC believes this trade-off can be mitigated given the tools now available to all school districts to prevent student absences due to COVID-19 quarantine. By using Test to Stay and the other tools available within the current DHEC guidance, very few students should have to quarantine and healthy kids can remain in school. Sincerely, Dr. Ed Sommer.
Does anyone have any questions for Mrs. Wood? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And when will Test to Stay be implemented in Lexington One?
We're going to talk about it tomorrow on where we stand Wednesday, and then so we'll prepare for that for Thursday.
All right. Dr. Little, anything else with your report?
No, ma'am, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.